A bright afternoon sun shone over Riverway Park, a green oasis at the heart of the city that was normally brimming with laughter and friendly competition. Today was no exception. Families spread out on colorful blankets enjoying picnics. Toddlers chased after bubbles that shimmered like tiny rainbows. And clusters of kids gathered at the playground to slide, swing, and spin on the merry-go-round. Amid this bustling scene, a youth soccer match took center stage on a well-kept field. Upbeat music blared faintly from a portable speaker near the sidelines, mixing with the excited chatter of parents and the squeals of younger siblings running in circles. In the middle of the field, a team of 10-year-olds, sporting bright orange uniforms, clashed against a visiting squad in green and white stripes. Cheers erupted from the sidelines each time a pass was completed, and parents craned their necks to catch every glimpse of their budding young athletes. Among the lively group, a particular boy named Ryan stood out, dashing across the field with a mixture of determination and anxiety plain on his face. His hair flopped into his eyes as he sprinted, ball at his feet, weaving around one defender before bearing down on the goalkeeper. The entire match seemed to hold its breath as Ryan pulled back his leg to shoot, only for the ball to veer just wide of the net at the last second. A wave of sympathetic gasps and scattered applause rippled along the sideline, except for one jarringly loud and angry voice that cleaved through the supportive hum like a knife. "You're useless, Ryan!" shouted Coach Barrett, a stocky man whose short temper was as infamous as his booming volume. "How on earth can you miss that shot?" His face turned red, and a bulging vein on his temple throbbed with each syllable. The impact of his words hit Ryan like a physical blow. The boy froze, tears threatening to spill from eyes that darted briefly toward his teammates, some of whom stifled awkward giggles. Others looked away, uncomfortable and unsure how to respond to their coach's outburst. Off to the side, parents exchanged anxious glances. A few mothers nudged each other, clearly disapproving of Coach Barrett's harsh reprimand, while a couple of fathers pursed their lips, torn between stepping in and staying silent. None seemed quite prepared to confront the intimidating man who continued his tirade, stomping around the sidelines as though every misstep in the game were a personal affront. Ryan, shoulders sagging under the weight of his humiliation, trudged off the field when the coach barked at him to sit down and think about how you messed up. The boy obeyed without protest, slumping onto the worn wooden bench and burying his flushed face in his hands. A hush of tension descended over the field, one that threatened to overshadow the once celebratory atmosphere. Watching this spectacle unfold from a short distance was Dwayne Johnson, a man in running shorts and a faded gray t-shirt who had paused in his morning jog to stretch by a park bench. Over the years, Dwayne had grown up loving soccer, finding joy in the camaraderie, teamwork, and the unspoken lessons that the sport could teach. Every pass, every dribble, every shot on goal had once felt like a doorway to possibility rather than a stage for derision or cruelty. As he witnessed Coach Barrett's rage, Dwayne felt a familiar stirring of outrage building inside him. This was more than just a single misguided coach. It was an affront to the very spirit of youth sports. Taking in Ryan's dejected figure, Dwayne's jaw tightened, and he knew he couldn't simply stand by. Enough was enough. Dwayne Johnson had jogged through Riverway Park countless times, relishing the sense of community the green space offered. Children practicing cartwheels, seniors pacing briskly in groups, and friendly dog walkers stopping to chat were all familiar sights. But that morning felt different. The oppressive negativity emanating from Coach Barrett's sideline rant clashed with the warmth of the sun and the general atmosphere of positivity around them. Dwayne's conscience nudged him forward, compelling him to act. He wasn't a man prone to seeking out confrontation, but he also believed firmly in standing up for those who were powerless, especially children trying their best in an environment that should have nurtured their self-esteem. As he neared the soccer field, Dwayne heard the coach's voice rise again, cutting through the air with unfiltered derision. "This is exactly why we lose games. You kids don't listen. Some of you can't even shoot straight," Coach Barrett boomed, ignoring the uncomfortable looks from the parents. One mother with a stroller full of snacks glanced at her friend, who gave a helpless shrug as if to say, "What can we do?" The quiet tension among the adults was palpable, as though each was silently waiting for someone else to intervene first. Meanwhile, the players themselves looked deflated, fidgeting nervously or doing their best to appear invisible. A few, emboldened by the coach's scornful attitude, whispered sarcastic remarks among themselves, perpetuating the cycle of negativity. Ryan, still perched on the bench, was the picture of despair. His knees were pulled close to his chest, and he stared at the blades of grass by his cleats. His father, Mr. Reynolds, paced the sidelines a few yards away, caught between anger at the coach's behavior and uncertainty about confronting him. Dwayne could tell that Mr. Reynolds wanted to say something. However, Coach Barrett's commanding presence seemed to cast a discouraging shadow that kept most people silent. A father stepping up might only escalate the situation, and it was a tricky balance between protecting one's child and not causing an explosive scene. Yet for Dwayne, the line had already been crossed. There was no justification for humiliating a child in front of peers and family. Steadying himself, Dwayne planted his feet on the edge of the field, just close enough that Coach Barrett couldn't ignore him. The shift in attention was immediate. A few parents who recognized Dwayne from the neighborhood nodded in acknowledgement, while others raised eyebrows curiously. The children, mid-game, followed the trajectory of the ball, yet also threw glances toward this tall, athletic figure who dared to challenge the status quo. Coach Barrett paused mid-rant, turning his glare on Dwayne as though irritated by the interruption. "Can I help you?" the coach snapped, the slightest waver in his voice betraying his surprise at being confronted. Dwayne inhaled slowly. He understood how quickly things could spiral if he matched aggression with aggression. "I'm wondering if what I'm seeing here is what you call coaching," he said in a controlled tone that bore an undercurrent of disapproval. "All I hear is yelling and insults. Is that really how you inspire a team?" A ripple of reaction swept through the small crowd. Parents who had been silently brooding over the coach's behavior exchanged looks of cautious hope. The kids, some enthralled, some concerned, waited to see where this would lead. Dwayne's gaze flickered over to Ryan, catching the boy's eyes for a moment. He offered an encouraging nod, silently letting Ryan know he was not alone anymore. Coach Barrett let out a dismissive snort, striding forward with the puffed-up stance of a man who believed he was above reproach. A hush spread across the field like a ripple through water. Even the children, who had continued their half-hearted scrimmage, gradually came to a stop as they sensed the looming confrontation. The only sounds were the distant shouts of children playing on the nearby playground and the chirping of birds that always seemed to accompany bright mornings in Riverway Park. "This is none of your business," Coach Barrett barked, still swaggering despite the tremor of indignation in his voice. The coach squared his shoulders, projecting an intimidation tactic that might have worked on others who dared oppose him. "Why don't you take your morning jog somewhere else and leave me to handle my team the way I see fit?" His scowl deepened, eyes flashing with defiance. Dwayne met the coach's glare with unwavering calm. "The moment you turned that kid's love for soccer into a public humiliation, you made it everyone's business," he replied evenly, his voice carrying just enough force to slice through the tension without escalating into a full-blown shouting match. He gestured subtly toward Ryan on the bench, whose downcast eyes and clenched fists made Dwayne's heart twist in sympathy. "Look at him. He's not learning or getting better by being torn down. You're not coaching right now. You're bullying." From the sidelines, a scattering of parents exchanged murmurs of agreement. A few mothers nodded vigorously. Others were still cautious. In some ways, it felt as though a dam had cracked, allowing a collective sigh of relief. The things they had wanted to say were finally being voiced by someone unafraid to challenge the coach's iron-fisted approach. Even the children, though still intimidated by the risk of incurring the coach's wrath, sneaked glances of gratitude toward Dwayne. Coach Barrett's cheeks blazed an even deeper red, either out of embarrassment or anger, or both. He briefly glanced at the cluster of parents who were now whispering among themselves. Turning back to Dwayne, the coach forced a hollow laugh. "You think you can do better, huh? You want to waltz onto my field and show me how it's done? Do you even know anything about soccer?" He jabbed a thumb toward himself. "I've been coaching for 15 years. These kids need tough love. They need someone who demands excellence, not a friend to coddle them." Dwayne stepped closer, each movement poised and controlled. He remembered his own coaches from childhood, individuals who pushed him to excel, but who never made him feel worthless when he failed. Demanding excellence doesn't mean humiliating a kid for missing a shot, Dwayne remarked, voice calm, yet carrying the unmistakable ring of conviction. If you think insulting them is the only way to make them better, then you've already failed as a coach. A few gasps rose from the parents. Clearly, they were witnessing a conversation they had hoped to have themselves but hadn't dared. The tension on the field was nearly tangible, yet there was an unexpected undercurrent of hope in the air, an almost electric sensation that something was about to shift in the favor of the kids. Ryan, still perched on the bench with his face half hidden, peeked over his knees. His posture straightened ever so slightly, as if the weight of shame was beginning to lift. The intensity of the standoff made it impossible for the match to continue as it had. One of the sideline referees, a volunteer dad who usually oversaw the weekend games, stood by uncertainly. He exchanged looks with another parent carrying an orange cooler. Neither wanted to interfere with what was rapidly becoming a pivotal moment, an intervention in a toxic cycle that everyone else had previously let slide. For his part, Coach Barrett seemed torn between doubling down on his tough guy persona and backing off in the face of increasing disapproval. Throwing his arms up in exasperation, Coach Barrett let out a mocking laugh. You talk a big game, but I guarantee you don't know the first thing about handling a team. Fine, hotshot. Why don't we make this interesting? He pointed to a faded penalty spot on the grass. You and me in a penalty shootout right now. If you win, I'll apologize to whoever you want and lay off these kids for good. But if I win, he raised his voice as though already tasting victory. You leave me and my team alone. Permanently. A hush fell again, replaced only by a collective intake of breath. The children shot each other looks that combined awe, delight, and apprehension all at once. Some of the more mischievous players seemed excited by the drama. Others just hoped that if Dwayne lost, the coach's anger wouldn't rebound into them twice as hard. Ryan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, curiosity and a spark of hope drawing him out of his slumped posture. Dwayne scanned the field, surveying the goal area. He remembered it from his own youth. Simple metal frames, well-worn nets, and lines that were faded but still visible. Memories of sleepless nights in high school spent perfecting free kicks came rushing back. Letting the slightest smile cross his lips, he turned back to Coach Barrett with a resolute nod. You're on, he declared, calm but unwavering. But with one condition, Ryan here, he tipped his head toward the boy, is the goalkeeper for both of us. If you're so confident these kids are worthless, let's see what happens when the one you just embarrassed has a chance to stand his ground. The coach shot Ryan a scornful look, rolling his eyes. Oh, you've got to be kidding me, he muttered, but the goading smirk remained on his face. If anything, the notion of dominating a child in a penalty face-off fed his swagger. Fine, he sneered. This'll be quick. Kid couldn't stop a balloon if it drifted his way. Invigorated by Dwayne's unshakable composure, Ryan forced himself to stand, taking a deep, unsteady breath. He wasn't sure if he had the skill to block any shots, but the mere fact that someone believed in him enough to ask him to try was a far cry from the shame and belittling words he'd been hearing all season. The bystanders shuffled into a semicircle around the makeshift penalty area. With the sun at its midday peak, the stage was set for a showdown that transcended a casual weekend game. It was about more than soccer. It was about a child's self-worth, a man's sense of right and wrong, and an entire group of onlookers who'd had enough of silent complicity. A feeling of suspense thickened the air as a parent in a neon windbreaker placed the ball precisely on the penalty spot. The bright glare of the sun, combined with the hush of anticipation, made the moment feel oddly cinematic. Dwayne stood to one side, rolling his shoulders to loosen tense muscles, while Ryan jogged slowly to the goal line. Although he tried to mask his nervousness, the boy's hands shook slightly at his sides. Still, a determined light flickered in his eyes, part fear, part hope, while Coach Barrett loomed over the ball with an unsettling confidence. All right, kid, the coach said, his voice echoing in the hush. Don't blink or you'll miss it. True to his bragging, he charged the ball with a burst of power. His foot connected solidly, sending it shooting through the air with a hiss. Ryan flung himself to the side, but the ball smacked into the net a fraction of a second later. A smattering of applause, likely from a few parents who reflexively applauded any goal, broke the silence. Coach Barrett's mouth twisted into a smug grin as he turned toward Dwayne. "One for me," he crowed, making a theatrical show of brushing off invisible dust from his shoulder. Without responding, Dwayne stepped up to the penalty spot, taking a moment to plant his feet and exhale. He glanced at Ryan, offering a quick, reassuring nod that said, "It's okay. Just do your best." The battered soccer ball rested on the white spot, faint scuff marks telling stories of numerous weekend battles. In one fluid motion, Dwayne took 3 measured steps back and lunged forward. The ball zipped off his foot with a precision that spoke of hours, perhaps years of practice. It sailed high and curved neatly into the upper right corner of the goal. Ryan dived, but it was more out of reflex than necessity. The shot was unstoppable. An eruption of cheers signaled the crowd's excitement. A few parents cheered extra loudly, seemingly relieved to see someone stand up to Coach Barrett in such a literal demonstration. Ryan pulled himself up from the ground and looked at Dwayne with a blend of admiration and awe. He hadn't realized until that moment that grown-ups could be supportive and fierce at the same time, especially in the face of intimidation. On the sidelines, Mr. Reynolds pumped a fist discreetly, clearly rooting for Dwayne. Coach Barrett's cocky grin slipped momentarily before he scoffed. "Lucky shot." But something in his eyes betrayed that he was rethinking his underestimation of this jogger who'd arrived out of nowhere to defend the kids. The shootout continued. Coach Barrett, stepping up for his second kick, opted to try a trick shot. He feigned left, then aimed right, hoping to rattle Ryan's confidence. The ball skimmed just inside the post, brushing the net as it landed. Again, Ryan missed the block by a hair's breadth, and the coach raised both arms in triumph. Dwayne remained unfazed. When it was his turn, he maintained the same pattern: 3 steps back, a moment of focus, and a driven shot that flew like an arrow into the net. Twice more had happened, each time with the crowd's cheers growing louder, bridging the gap between parents who'd once stood silent. By the time they reached the final 2 shots, the scoreboard, informal as it was, stood at a tense tie. Coach Barrett, now sweating under the midday sun, tried to mask his nerves by exaggerating his bravado. He wiped an arm across his brow and glared at Ryan, who could feel the intensity of the coach's gaze like a hot poker. "You better get ready, kid," he snarled, "because this one's going to break the net." Overhearing this, Dwayne couldn't suppress a grimace. The coach's menacing attitude toward a 10-year-old felt more distasteful than ever. Nonetheless, Ryan was growing increasingly determined. Each failed block had stung, but he found a spark of courage in Dwayne's unwavering support and the kindness that some parents had shown. He stole a quick glance at his teammates standing in a cluster off to one side. Some, including Zach, who usually played midfield, were silently rooting for him, fists clenched by their sides as they telegraphed silent messages of encouragement. Others stared in uneasy amazement, as though a new reality was unfolding in which they were no longer powerless. Coach Barrett launched his final shot with all the force he could muster. The ball streaked toward the left corner, summoning every ounce of determination. Ryan stretched out in a diving save. His palms slapped against the ball, and although it ricocheted hard against his arm, it glanced off the post and bounded away. A heart-stopping moment of silence preceded an explosion of cheers from nearly everyone on the field. Ryan, though his elbow throbbed, scrambled to his feet, adrenaline mixing with disbelief that he'd actually blocked a shot from the imposing coach. For a split second, Coach Barrett stood in stunned confusion, staring at the ball that was now rolling harmlessly along the grass. Murmurs of excitement passed through the crowd like an electric current, while parents and kids alike clapped and shouted words of praise for Ryan. "Nice save," yelled one father. "That's the way, buddy," called another mother, her voice breaking with raw emotion. The coach's face hardened. He looked as though he'd just tasted something foul, but he clamped down on his pride, turning his attention, reluctantly, to Dwayne. Now it was Dwayne's turn to take his final shot. If he scored, Coach Barrett's defeat would be undeniable. Bending down to straighten the ball on the penalty spot, Dwayne paused and locked eyes with Ryan. He could practically see the swirl of hope and renewed self-confidence in the boy's gaze. Silently acknowledging that it all came down to this, Dwayne took 3 steps back. The crowd seemed to breathe in unison, parents holding their children's hands as the moment crystallized into high drama. When Dwayne struck the ball, it was with calculated finesse rather than raw power. It arced neatly past Ryan, who still dove on instinct, and bulged the back of the net with a resounding snap. The field erupted with applause, yells, whistles, and relieved laughter. For a moment, the air itself felt charged with possibility, as though an important victory had been won well beyond the literal scoreboard of the day. Grinning modestly, Dwayne turned to Coach Barrett, whose expression vacillated between anger and forced composure. The crowd's reaction left him no choice but to acknowledge the outcome. Dwayne Johnson had beaten him. With that decisive goal, the makeshift penalty shootout came to a close, and Dwayne calmly walked toward a furious-looking Coach Barrett. The hush that descended was filled with expectation. It was no longer about the final score. It was about whether Coach Barrett would make good on the deal he had so arrogantly proposed. On one side, parents stood arm in arm or side by side, eyes fixed on the coach in collective anticipation. On the other, the players huddled together, many of them wearing expressions of cautious hope, as though they couldn't quite believe someone had finally taken a stand against their domineering coach. "You lost," Dwayne said, his voice calm yet firm. "So you know what that means." He gestured toward Ryan, who was still near the goal, catching his breath and gingerly rubbing his elbow. Coach Barrett glowered, his gaze flicking from Dwayne to the small group of parents whose exasperation had turned into a quiet sense of triumph. The coach's lips parted in what looked like a snarl, but he checked himself, swallowing his pride. After all, the entire reason for this showdown had been his own challenge. He couldn't back out now without looking even more cowardly in front of everyone. With forced reluctance, he trudged toward Ryan. The boy turned, eyes wide, unsure whether another outburst was coming. "Ryan," Coach Barrett said, through gritted teeth, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said you were useless. That was out of line." His voice grew quieter, as though each syllable was being wrenched from him. "You gave it your all, and I shouldn't have humiliated you." A moment of silence hung in the air, broken only by the rustling leaves overhead. Ryan blinked, processing the apology that only hours ago seemed like an impossible dream. Slowly, his shoulders relaxed, and he managed a shaky nod. While it didn't erase the memories of being shouted down, it was a start, proof that he didn't deserve to be mocked for trying his best. Sensing the fragile nature of the moment, a few parents broke into applause. Others simply wore relieved smiles, as if a storm cloud had finally passed. "Now," Dwayne interjected, stepping forward so his voice carried across the field, "there's something else that needs to happen here. Apologizing is a good start, but the bigger issue is how you're coaching these kids. They deserve encouragement. Critique their mistakes, sure, but humiliating them isn't how they learn. If you can't see that, maybe you shouldn't be in this role at all." Another wave of reaction swept through the parents, whose approval was far more obvious now that someone had shown them the path to speaking up. Coach Barrett looked from one face to another, seeing that the tide of public opinion had turned sharply against him. He offered the faintest of nods, frustration evident in the tight lines across his brow. I hear you," he muttered begrudgingly. His posture sagged, as though a heavy burden of his own making now weighed upon him. "I'll do better, but don't think this changes everything," he added, almost as an afterthought, a flicker of defiance not yet extinguished. The effects of Dwayne's victory were immediate and profound, rippling outward to shift the entire atmosphere of the field. A sense of lightness replaced the tense gloom that had settled over the game. Parents who previously stood in uneasy silence now gathered in small clusters, discussing the sudden turn of events with visible relief. Several approached Ryan with congratulatory remarks, praising his bravery for standing in goal even after being berated. The boy drank in the positive attention like a parched plant soaking up rain. His cheeks flushed, but his smile wide. Mr. Reynolds stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Ryan's shoulder as he murmured words of praise for his son's resilience. Dwayne, meanwhile, took a step back to let the initial commotion settle. He was pleased to see a few kids on the Orange team forming a circle around Ryan, tapping knuckles or patting him on the back. "Good save, man," said Zach, the midfielder, who had watched everything with rapt attention. "Didn't know you had that in you." The usual competitiveness among the kids morphed into a supportive camaraderie that they had rarely felt under Coach Barrett's strict regime. With the penalty shootout over, the volunteer referee cleared his throat and attempted to resume the scrimmage. But the team's excitement over what had transpired overshadowed any immediate desire to keep playing. Instead, they clustered around Dwayne, bombarding him with questions. "Are you a professional player? Do you coach somewhere else? Can you show us some cool tricks?" Their eagerness to learn from him was palpable. A flustered but amused smile played on Dwayne's lips as he raised a hand gently to quell the outpouring of curiosity. "I'm just someone who loves soccer," he explained, making eye contact with each child in turn. "But I also love seeing players enjoy the game instead of worrying about every little mistake. That's how you grow." Coach Barrett hovered in the background, arms folded defensively over his chest. Yet a subtle shift in his demeanor suggested a man forced to reconsider his methods. He caught bits of the kids' excited chatter and the parents' expressions of gratitude toward Dwayne. While some might read his scowl as lingering hostility, there was also something akin to reflection in his eyes, as if he recognized that the humiliation tactic had finally backfired in a very public way. Dwayne used this lull to address the team as a whole, his voice carrying easily across the grass. "I know it's been a rough day," he began, "and I know some of you have been feeling discouraged, but you've got skill. I saw that out there. You're passing well, hustling for the ball, setting up decent plays. Those are things to be proud of. Think of mistakes as stepping stones. When you mess up, you learn something that makes you better the next time." Enthralled, the kids nodded, fresh hope gleaming in their eyes. One parent whispered to another about how refreshing it was to hear positive coaching. Another parent dabbed at her eyes, seemingly moved by the simple act of kindness and belief in the children's potential. In that moment, the entire field felt alive with possibility, a stark contrast to the oppressive cloud of criticism that had enveloped it just an hour earlier. "All right," Dwayne said, addressing the children who were visibly brimming with renewed energy. "How about we actually have some fun now?" He glanced at Coach Barrett with a neutral, measured look, silently inviting collaboration rather than confrontation. After a strained pause, the coach gave a curt nod, stepping aside to let Dwayne take a more active role. The parents, sensing a breakthrough, began to smile and clap, encouraging the shift in leadership. Dwayne directed the kids into two lines for a quick drill. "We're going to work on short passes," he explained, picking up a nearby ball. "Zach, you're in line 1. Ryan, you're in line 2. I want you to focus on accuracy, not power. Keep your eye on the ball, lock your ankle, and follow through." His voice, firm yet encouraging, carried easily, and the kids obeyed with enthusiastic discipline. Even Coach Barrett watched from the sidelines, arms still crossed but no longer barking orders. From time to time, he opened his mouth as though to say something, only to think better of it and shut it again. Ryan in particular seemed transformed. He met Zach at the cones, steadying himself before delivering a crisp pass that landed squarely at his friend's feet. Zach returned the pass, and the two boys repeated the motion several times with increasing confidence. "That's it," Dwayne called, clapping his hands once. "Footwork, concentration, looking good." The rest of the team, following suit, focused on mastering the basics rather than worrying about ridicule for each misstep. A sense of unity and genuine excitement began to radiate through them, as if a fog had been lifted. Watching this, some parents on the sidelines exchanged small words of admiration. "I can't believe how different the atmosphere is now," remarked one mother, who was holding a toddler on her hip. "My son used to come off the field dreading the next practice," added a father in a baseball cap. "But look at them now. They're actually smiling and learning." Mr. Reynolds, Ryan's father, maintained a watchful stance nearby, tears of quiet gratitude pooling in his eyes. While he had considered speaking out against the coach in the past, he'd never imagined this kind of complete turnaround happening in the space of a single afternoon. Yet, the day wasn't over. In the distance, the sky had begun to shift toward the warm hues of late afternoon. A gentle reminder that the game and the lessons learned would soon give way to the normal rhythms of family dinners and homework. Dwayne decided it was the perfect moment to put everything into a quick mini-match. Splitting the group into two teams, he appointed Ryan as a forward on one side and Zach as a midfielder on the other. Coach Barrett, perhaps out of residual discomfort, lingered at the edge of the pitch, hands tightening and loosening against his arms. His instincts seemed to be to bark out instructions, but each time he opened his mouth, he saw Dwayne's calm, guiding presence with the children and held himself back. Despite their earlier meltdown, the kids wasted no time forming their positions with surprising eagerness. The volunteer referee gave an uncertain shrug and blew the whistle, resuming a more structured play. This time, the atmosphere was worlds apart from the negativity that had tarnished the earlier portion of the game. Shouts of, "I'm open," mixed with laughter. Mistakes were met with quick recoveries instead of scathing remarks. Ryan, still buoyed by the redemption of his penalty blocking moment, dribbled around a defender and passed to Zach with a grin. Even when the other team regained possession, the kids hustled back, showing a newfound determination that felt unstoppable. And through it all, Dwayne observed with a guiding hand, calling out supportive tips instead of rebukes. The mini-match ended with a score that hardly mattered. What truly counted was the eruption of joy across the field. Parents clapped and congratulated their children with genuine pride, while the young players themselves mingled in a friendly huddle, discussing the moments of the game they found most exciting. Dwayne stood off to one side, sipping from a water bottle offered by a thoughtful parent. He watched as Coach Barrett finally approached Ryan with measured steps, tension still visible in his shoulders. But this time there was no yelling, only a grudging attempt at kindness. "You did good out there, kid," the coach said quietly, glancing briefly at Dwayne. The apology was incomplete, but in its own stumbling way, it marked a step forward. Ryan's father, Mr. Reynolds, soon joined them, placing an arm around his son. "We owe you a lot," he said to Dwayne, voice thick with emotion. "Ryan struggled so much with confidence. Watching you stand up for him today, well, it means more than I can put into words." Ryan, too, looked at Dwayne with the sort of gratitude that only comes from a once-broken spirit finding a renewed sense of worth. A few parents, including the mother with the toddler, drifted closer to add their thanks. "Someone needed to speak up," said Dwayne, his tone humble. "But it shouldn't end with me. If things ever go back to the way they were, don't hesitate to stand together. It makes a difference." A short distance away, Zach and a handful of other teammates were listening to one parent's phone replay of the blocked penalty shot. With wide eyes and excited exclamations, they dissected the moment as though it were a highlight from a professional match. Coach Barrett hovered near them, arms still crossed defensively, but his anger seemed to have cooled. Perhaps witnessing genuine unity and growth was planting seeds of doubt in his long-standing approach. He occasionally cut glances toward Dwayne, as if pondering how a stranger had managed to do so much in so little time. As the family started gathering their belongings, folding chairs, cooler bags, and soccer gear, Dwayne found himself besieged by children who wanted him to return for future practices. "You're way cooler than any coach we've had," one insisted, her braids bouncing as she hopped in excitement. "Are you going to come every weekend?" asked another, clutching a battered ball under one arm. Laughing softly, Dwayne looked over at Coach Barrett, noticing the man's conflicted expression. "I'm no official coach here," he explained gently, "and I think the person who should be guiding you is already on this field. But maybe now he'll do it differently." In an unexpected show of introspection, Coach Barrett cleared his throat. "Look," he began, "I know I messed up. I thought screaming at them would make them tough. Didn't realize it was just pushing them away." There was no dramatic apology or teary-eyed confession, but the regret in his voice was enough to hint at change. The parents listened warily, cautiously optimistic. "I'm going to rethink how I handle things," he continued, forcing the words out, as though they were foreign to him. "I owe you all that much." A contented hush followed, punctuated by the distant laughter from the playground and the rustle of a soft breeze through the trees. Dwayne nodded approvingly. "That's all anyone can ask," he said, extending a hand. After a moment's hesitation, Coach Barrett shook it. Their handshake felt like an uneasy truce, the first step toward a healthier dynamic for the entire team. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the turf, The children dispersed, some heading home, others lingering to talk about everything that had transpired. Ryan, holding the game ball, approached Dwayne one last time. His eyes shone with respect and something deeper, hope. "Thank you for believing in me," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Dwayne crouched to meet his gaze, replying, "You believed in yourself too, Ryan. That's what mattered most." With that final exchange, Dwayne gathered his things and began jogging out of Riverway Park, the same route he'd come in on earlier. But the difference in the atmosphere was tangible. Where he had once heard insults and ridicule, he now heard laughter and words of encouragement. It was as though the park itself breathed a sigh of relief, grateful that the toxic cloud had lifted. In the golden light of late afternoon, Dwayne's figure receded into the distance, carrying with him the satisfaction of having intervened when it counted most. And on the soccer field behind him, the echoes of his courage lingered in every child's heart, a reminder that one voice can indeed make all the difference.